Welcome to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast.
Hi, I'm David Manti, and welcome to a new episode of the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast. With me this week is Kyle Sheridan. He's the owner of Sunny Gardens, Vermont. Thank you very much for joining me today, Kyle.
Thanks for having me, David.
Before we get started, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You could also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you can reach me at david@cannabisequipmentnews.com with email the podcast in the subject line. You can also subscribe to our daily newsletter. Make sure you get it delivered to your inbox first. Kyle, I always like to start the conversation learning a little bit about your own personal journey to cannabis. So what was it that got you started in the industry?
Well, the industry part, I was a user since I was about 14.
Okay.
And lived in Vermont my whole life. Recreation opened about 5 years ago in Vermont. So it was a big, new, exciting market. I had a lot of passion there. So I just started on Instagram and started growing about 5 years ago, and was, encouraged by some friends to look into getting into the recreational market. I ended up not getting in to the actual market to be a grower, but I got into making seeds pretty much right off the bat. I didn't really waste much time there. I grew for about a year and then started making crosses. But I got a job delivering in the wholesale side of the market within the last year, and retired from car sales, which was my main job for 15 years. And that was my career. And I thought that's where I would, retire and die. But so I've been slowly getting in. Some of my strains have made the recreational market. They're in stores. I'm going to be working for a new grow store here in town, for one of the largest dispensaries in our state. So I kind of do a bunch of different things. But that's how I got into the industry, I guess.
What was it like when you first started growing?
It was exciting because, the timing just in my life lined up. I've always wanted to grow. My dad was a florist, so I grew up around plants. And, I always wished like he had a passion for cannabis, because I just figured he would be good at growing it because he was so good at taking care of plants and flowers and things like that. So in 2020, I bought a house. It became legal to grow, and my buddy put a plant on my back porch, and away we went. That was it for me.
Well, when you started using the plant back when you were 14 years old, was it strictly recreational use, or were you using it medicinally?
I thought I was using it recreationally, but I was using it medicinally. I had a bunch of pain from an accident when I was 13. I was in a wheelchair for a while. Lots of skin graft operations, nerve damage. It was rough. So when I got, out of the rehab and got home and was starting to take different pain medicine, because it wasn't, I used to be on a drip for morphine. It was extremely painful, and I had a button I could push when I needed it. But they don't send you home with that stuff. And I was still in a lot of pain doing rehab. And eventually I had to stop taking morphine. I mean, it just, the doctors wanted to get me off of it, but, I'd been on it for such a long time that it was going to be tough. My mom weaned me off it. She's a nurse, so she kind of knew how to do that and didn't tell me about it. So I was like thinking I was getting it, but I wasn't getting it. And then the transition from not being on morphine and starting to smoke cannabis was literally like, there was like a 6-month window there where I wasn't on, the morphine, but then started to use cannabis. So that once I started using it, and a lot of the stuff I was dealing with was going away physically, and I was feeling better mentally, I knew it was, you know, for me. Now, granted, at that time in my life, all my friends were not doing it or using it for that, and I didn't really realize it right away. We were just trying to get high and experiment with marijuana. So
What happened in the accident?
I had chicken pox, and then I fell down the stairs while I had the chicken pox, and I cracked my hip. Oh, fractured it. My body created a septic infection inside the hip
Oh
from
my
the fracture. The chickenpox virus was apparently it's located like primarily in your abdomen, and somehow the infection and the virus combined and made this extremely rare disease. No one ever gets it. No one's ever, it's been forever since anyone got it. It's called purpura fulminans. It's still Latin because it's still so rare. And I was given experimental medicine that nobody had been given yet because I was dying, and they didn't know what else to do. And this was made for that. And they figured this was the opportunity to learn kind of through me. And it worked. I'm alive. But I had some weird clotting issues because of it. It was a blood disease that affects the clotting in your blood. And I ended up getting too much blood in my legs, basically. And they kind of blew open in a way. They ruptured. So I was treated like a burn victim. I had all the skin off my stomach and my back was stapled to my legs. Extremely, extremely painful stuff. Mid 90s skin grafts. If anybody have ever known what that's like, they basically just take a roller with a slicer and shave it off your body and make holes in it with this machine, and then they staple it to the part of your body that needs skin.
Oh, that
Oh,
is visceral.
rough.
Yeah. What?
Sorry for the I don't know if you knew you were getting into that. So
No, no. I mean, hey, well, like you said, many people haven't heard of that. I certainly haven't, and that sounds like you really
yeah,
went through
I,
quite a bit.
I was the
Um,
first person to get that drug. So it was just one of those weird things and timing in life. And it was right before the chickenpox vaccine came out.
oh,
And the doctors, of course, said, had you had the vaccine, we probably wouldn't have been here. So that's
did they
just
name the drug after you?
no, it's called protein C concentrate.
Okay.
Um, I am in a ton of medical journals. They should have named maybe the disease after me, but some other famous people had gotten it too. So, but I was the first kid, to survive it, and that's 13 and under. They
Yeah.
still consider me a kid. Uh, so.
Well, transitioning to your role in the cannabis market, well, actually, before that, so how has your relationship with cannabis evolved? From the early use medicinally as a kid, through as an adult.
Well, I was always, a user, and that got me to the point where I tried to figure out where I could get the best medicine, and I did that for a long time. And I ended up, it's a small state. I grew up here. I ended up meeting a lot of the right people, so to speak. And, you know, I could tell the difference between, because back then we really only had two kinds. It was good or bad. Um, and now it's unbelievable the difference. I'm 47, so I've been smoking for over 30 years in Vermont. Um, Black market to the green market. And I'm a grower. So, you know, I I I've seen a huge transition from that. And then the adult side, I mean, once it was legal to grow it, um, I started consuming my own medicine. That really opened up my eyes a little bit more to the differences. And coming from where I came from, we used to get some pretty shoddy stuff at back then, and then we get good stuff too. But it was crazy times, I guess, between those all those decades, the differences.
What is the market like in Vermont?
It's amazing. It really, as far as quality of the products, the people, the dispensaries, um, the amount of access, price point, maybe not for the growers, but it's starting to become a little bit more affordable than it was a couple of years ago with the amount of products. Now, with any new market, there's growing pains, and we're experiencing some of that too. Um, the the products are great, the quality is great, the prices are good. Um, the tough spot I see in the market is the growers getting shelf space and the price per pound that they're getting based off of what some of the larger people are starting to be able to price out per pound. And being in the wholesale side and going into dispensaries and talking to growers and being friends with, I mean, I'm friends with probably not so much friends, but I'm talking to and know about probably 60-70% of the people in the market, and I hear everybody's frustrations, and I hear their accomplishments too. So, um, you know, the and I hear what it's like in other states, and I feel blessed that I'm here and our market is the way it is. There are probably too many dispensaries, and there's probably too many people in the market per capita. If you do the math, that's kind of, we were doing it the other day, and we totally forgot about kids.
Oh,
So I was like, how many licensed growers are there in our state? How many thousands of people? It's one per whatever, 1,000 people almost.
mhm.
But then I didn't factor in 30% of that's children. So
Yeah.
none of them can have a license. So it's really one in, I think, like 700 people in this state have a license to do something in cannabis, whether it's grow it, process it, or, you know.
Is that, is market saturation one of those chief frustrations that you're hearing from dispensaries and growers?
Yeah. Yeah. And then, locally, if they're too close to each other physically, normally there's that, and then there's obviously relationships, the people that have been here from the beginning, dealing with the people that they've been dealing with from the beginning, like to deal with those people. And anyone that comes in new, whether you're a grower or a dispensary, it's a little harder. You know, and some of these places are so big, they almost need to have a dispensary or two just to get rid of all their product.
Mhm.
Because there's a volume, and then there's a certain amount that gets consumed, right? And
Oh, yeah.
so it's a numbers game. So
Were you had been involved in the cannabis industry in some way for a number of years. Did you get involved with the legalization effort?
no, I didn't. Um, I knew my state would get there because we're a pretty liberal place, and um, Maine and Massachusetts are real close to us, and um, I didn't get involved with the normal, movement way back in the day. I kind of tried to stay quiet about it. There was a period where you could kind of be like, oh yeah, I'm all about this, but for a long time you kind of had to, unless you were really into it. And I wasn't fully there. I was selling cars here in my hometown. I didn't want to be ringing the bell, so to speak, as to what I was hoping the state would do. But I knew it would get there because we just have a cool state, and we do things a little differently. And Vermont has always wanted to keep it so that the little guy doesn't get pushed out.
Mm.
And they have limited the amount of big corporations and MSOs to have licenses, and they put a halt to licensing as well. So it's gonna be some attrition. There's gonna be some fallout over the next couple of years, and then hopefully it'll stabilize. The prices will hopefully maybe go back up a little. All the quality remains the same at least, and there should be hopefully some more profit for everybody. There's the CCB, the Cannabis Control Board, which kind of runs the whole show with regulations and everything. They're changing things monthly to make things better, in hopes to make things better. One of the things that a lot of the small farms want is direct to consumer access. So, they want the farmer market. They don't want people coming to their houses, but, they want to go and, be able to sell their stuff somewhere with to try and cut out the dispensary, so to speak, so that they can increase profit a bit. Because that's where the profit gets brought down, is when you have so many places going into one spot.
How did you get involved in the distribution side of the business?
Well, once I retired from, I just said I'm done with cars, and I figured it was time, and I knew I would find something somewhere to do in the business, but it would be a lot easier if I was available. So I retired from cars in October of last year. Couple months later, I got the job in the wholesale market through a friend who works for one of the larger farms here in Vermont. He had known this guy and the other guy that run the company for a while. I actually didn't know him, and I felt like I knew everybody, but I didn't need to know anybody in the wholesale market. I wasn't in the market. I didn't need to get rid of anything, and I didn't care how the dots were connected, so to speak. But then I was introduced to these guys, and just referred in, and they thought I'd be a perfect fit because of how many people I knew, that I knew the product. I knew a lot of the dispensary owners and the growers. It would be probably a pretty fun job too. So, it's just part-time because you're on the road. I'm on the road 8 to 10 hours a day doing it. So I just do it 2 days a week. But that job gets me talking to growers and dispensary owners and people in the industry all the time. And that's just opened up more doors for me, which, I'll be starting a new job here in about a month with one of the largest dispensaries. They're opening up a grow store. And I also represent Organic Mechanic Soil Company here in Vermont. So I'm a big living soil grower. So that's, I have a lot of passion in soil, and so that I'll be at the grow store talking to people about how to grow at home. That's really my passion, is home growing. I'm in the market in a way, but the people I care the most about growing cannabis and growing my seeds and my genetics are people who grow at home. It's not.
Why is that the most important to you?
Because it's more of a personal thing. The market requires, unfortunately, certain things for it to work, and certain places will not grow anything unless it's 23% THC, 3% terpenes. They yield a certain amount per light, and they yield that amount in a certain amount of time. So the harvest windows, the harvest amount, all that has to work because unfortunately in the market, people are going to the dispensaries and one of the first things out of their mouth is what's your highest percentage pre-roll,
Mhm.
right? So I could have some of the best stuff in the world, but if it hits 16 all day at the lab, it's going to be hard for a person to put it in the market because they're unsure of how well it will move. And then there's another thing where, like a lot of my a lot of my genetics are F1s, some of them are F2s where I've taken a really nice plant, crossed it with a really nice plant. You're going to get a mixture of plants. You're not going to get the same thing from every plant. If
Mhm.
I work something several generations deep, you're probably going to get exactly the same thing. And in the market, you kind of need to know that. So like my genetics get into the market by people getting them through me, and then they hunt through the genetics. If they find something that is really good and it will hit all those numbers, then they will probably make it into a mom, start to clone it, and then do a whole run of that one strain. I haven't had anybody do that yet. I'm guessing in the next year or two that's going to happen. I've had one of my genetics grown outdoors by Green Mountain Sativa, who lives pretty close to me. She's a dear friend, and she fell in love with one of my plants that I gave her. It was just a gift that I gave her for a class she was doing, but it ended up being so good that it went to market, and we're gonna probably bring it back and hopefully some more. So
What is that like for you personally when you see your seeds, your genetics go on to make a big impact in somebody's life?
it's huge. That's that's the best part of it, really. I don't think I've profited it at all this whole time, and I don't really focus on that part. Um, so just the recognition of making something that was good enough to be there. That's good enough for me. And then to hear that things help people, um, you know, that's hugely impactful. Whenever you can make someone physically feel better or mentally feel better because of something you gave them, whether it's CBD oil or flour or whatever it is, that's where it's at.
When you're spending, 10 to 12 hours on the road when you're working on the distribution side, what do your days look like?
Well, 2 hours of that is getting there and back.
Yeah.
So it's a little ways away that I have to get there. But in the morning, I go in and they basically have a board and they have the different spots we're going to. We get what's called a pick list, which is what we're picking for the order. And that's where I start my day. I get the pick list, I go downstairs, and we have a climate controlled room where we have all the different products. We have the freezers, I have the rosins and totes, and I go through the order and put 100 pre-rolls of this or 50 pre-rolls of that. Um, um, edibles are a big thing. Gummies, we distribute a lot of gummies and drinks as well, because those are a lot of products people don't want to make at home. So and you just basically fill up the car. They give you a drive sheet. You drive around in order. I look at the map every day, but they pretty much know which is going to be the quickest way to do the route before I even have to do it. And I get contact information. And then I go to the dispensaries and pop in. It's usually about 20 minutes at most, checking stuff in. You got to sign in. You got to, let them know that you're there. And then they go through and make sure you bought them everything right. Sometimes, you have to pick up a check and sometimes they pay ACH or it's on credit or something like that. But and then there's other things where I have to go to the farms and pick stuff up, like in between the dispensaries. So like I'll be going to 3 dispensaries and then pick up product to bring back to the warehouse. And then there's one day a week where we go to the lab as part of our services that we do for our clients. We also pick up their samples from our certified drop-off spots. So we get their samples to the labs every week for them. So there's usually one run to the lab a week. Everything has to be tested before it makes the market, obviously. So, it's like the first thing they have to do is get it tested.
So let's start with the farmers. As you're going in between these different operations, what are some of the things that you see that are, indicators of best practices, and what are some things to you that are, could be a potential red flag?
Sure. I'm not going to obviously name any names, but huge, stark, big contrast there. I've gone in, and there's a lot of outdoor facilities and indoor too. So there's a mix of both. A lot of the tier one guys, they can do this stuff in the basement of their house. So I'm not actually going in there and seeing what's going on there. I just go to their house and see their house. So that can tell me something right there, but then I go into some of the cleanest, nicest facilities where I know their SOPs are on the money and their flour is great, and I know it's clean. And and they are super careful about even what room I'm in and, stuff like that. Like I had to, for instance, Nick from Forbin's Finest had me up, and they are, Vermont's favorite growers, according to one of the periodicals here, and they are just unbelievable people, and they really do it great. They have amazing strains, and when I went to visit Nick, I had to get into literally a surgical clothes. I went into locker room. I put these booties on. I had to dip my shoes in this stuff that killed everything that was on my shoes. Hair nets.
Yeah.
Like he let me take pictures, right? But then there's some guys that won't let you take pictures, but they could give a shit about anything. Excuse me. I don't know.
No, you're all right.
All right. But and then farm to farm outdoor facilities, some of these greenhouses are just amazing. Some of these facilities are just set up perfectly too on pieces of land that have just perfect sun and constant wind, and that's the difference. Some people are growing in areas that it's hard to grow in. They call them traps. There's mold and mildew that like it there because of it's a valley and there's less wind, and there's if we have a lot of heavy rains, you could have a tough grow season. We had one of the worst seasons 3 years ago. I think it would have been 3 years ago. Not too many people finished much, but then last year was amazing and everybody finished just about everything. So there's big differences there. Like one farm I know, they bought this old farm that was an old dairy farm, and they put up, I think it's 8 greenhouses over the soil that the cows were pooping on for like 100 years. Do you think that soil's better than some of the other places? Yeah, and and that, so those are some of the differences, you see. Everybody wants to have a cleaner grow, but I mean, there's people that are doing it in real little spots and really packing it in, and then there's people doing it in huge spots that are just blessed with bigger facilities. And of course, I imagine their bills are a whole lot bigger too. But sustainability is huge. So, some of these bigger places, if they're hooked up with solar, if they get their, like, for instance, Foreman's, they reclaim all their humidity. That's their water. That's how they water their plants. So they don't pay for water, and they're also hooked up to a solar um, community. So they're paying less for their electricity, and by doing that and having a dispensary, those are the types of things that will make certain places make it, and other places, well, unfortunately.
Do you think that type of differentiation when it comes to cultivation practices, does that help or hinder the industry?
Meaning,
like to have that type of variety. There are so many, when you think of the manufacturing industry, right? Like everyone has the same SOP, every factory looks essentially the same.
Right. I think that's, the fact that it's so diverse is great, and everybody grows differently, I mean, I'm a soil guy. So if I was to go and do a dispensary and buy flower, which I don't do much, I would ask for, number one, living soil grown. And I wouldn't ask for the high THC. I would ask for most amount of terpenes and the biggest gap between THC and TAC. That would be what I'd ask the bud tender, and that would probably surprise some of them, because that's where I find the better medicine. But some people grow in cocoa, and this stuff looks great and all that. It smokes good, it tastes good, but I'll tell you what, the high doesn't last that long. And I'm a sun-grown fanatic. I love outdoor. There are some of the best stuff I've smoked is outdoor, grown in this state, last year even, just some of my own stuff. I'm constantly grabbing my outdoor over my indoor. And it's just the feeling you get from sun grown. So lights too, lights have a big piece to that. These growers can't use anymore, because of energy audits and things like that. They have to all use LEDs now. So there's some old school growers using HPSs and stuff like that, which you'll get different expressions. You get the transpiration of the plant's different because of the heat that light gives off. Now, the same guy that's been growing with that light has to switch to LED. Well, that light was giving off enough heat that now that he doesn't have the heat from that, he has to add a heater. Mm-hmm. So is it really helping? I don't know, but those are some of the things that you see and hear, and that's new. Some of these growers were growing with older lights a couple of years ago, but now all of a sudden they're making it so everybody's got to use LEDs, which I understand. But
how'd you become a soil guy?
Because I was old. That's all I've ever done, really. And soil is therapeutic to me. I mean, they've done studies on that. You smell good soil and it does something. I'm not smart enough to tell you what, but there's just something about it. I was taught to grow with living soil in an earth box. I was taught to top dress. I was taught to not use. I didn't start out with salts or cocoa based or just cocoa, and I'd like to try hydro and stuff like that at some point, but it's going to be really hard for me to switch because of just how often I smoke the two different kinds, and I can tell the difference, just like a tomato. I mean, when you grow a tomato in the summertime at home and it's ripe and you pick it off the vine and you eat that, and then you go to the store and buy a tomato that was grown hydroponically or organically, and it's beautiful and it's red and looks great. There's a huge difference in the taste, and I find that you can't unlock terpenes without soil. Like there's a connection there. It just, I work for a soil company that has done enough tests on their soil that they know that their soil increases terpenes. Like they put it right on the back, because that's a big part of it. THC is one piece of cannabis.
Mm-hmm.
Terpenes is the best part, I think.
No, I mean, well, and to that point, do you think the consumer will eventually evolve to look at those other factors? Do you see a cannabis industry where we move beyond people just walking in saying, I want the most potent?
Sure. They need to remove it from the label.
Oh, okay.
I've heard that there's places trying to do it differently where they won't tell you what the strain is or won't tell you what the THC is. They just kind of tell you what the effect is. But these bud tenders should be asking these people what they need it for, and especially if they're new, and the consumers should be going in and giving that information, because these bud tenders, they can tell you. They're educated enough to help you find the right medicine for you. It's not always THC. And it, the words indica and sativa, people don't even like using those terms anymore because, people see indica and they think, well, I can only smoke it the last hour of the day. So, better education, they have good things on the label, but people are hyper focused on the percentage of the THC, and that's because of the money. That's because they're, at the end of the day, they have to buy something and they have to get the most that they can for what they have. So like if you go to a store and they got a deal on, apples or something like that, you might go for, you want the best quality, but I guess that's not a good analogy right there. But anyway, you know what I'm trying to say is,
I know. I mean, I get what you're saying in terms of apples because, I'm going into the store looking for some organic pink ladies, and every once in a while, depending on a good deal, I might come home with some galas, and I understand that all factors into a consumer's buying habits.
Yeah. I mean, and a lot of these people buy based on what they have that week. I mean, a lot of the people going in there are waitresses and bartenders. They get done with their shift and run in the dispensary. It depends on what they need, but I also see a lot of elderly people going, and they're not elderly. I don't even like using that term. The 60s and 70s with medical issues, and they're talking to the bud tender about what they need or what works. And it's pretty funny when you're listening to a 70-year-old lady talk about doing a dab because that's like the only thing that takes away her ailments, and how it took her so long to get there and how she understands it now. She's comfortable with the process, and she got to uses a puff go instead of a torch and a dab rig that scares the heck out of people. But that type of interaction is good to hear, because you're really hearing what people need.
So some cannabis companies have been trying to give more recognition to the growers, to the people behind the genetics. They're even sharing who created the strain. Is that something that you would enjoy, that sort of notoriety, or would you prefer to kind of stay behind the scenes?
No, I'm fine with it as long as doesn't cause me to have to get a license, so to speak. Like it's a weird spot I'm in. Some places are fine with selling seeds in their dispensaries, and some places want it to be, everything has to be this, and this. And there's people that want to do collabs in the future, and they would be putting my logo right on the package with theirs, but they'd be using their packaging to make it legit, so to speak. I obviously put my logos on all my genetics that are out there, but my one strain that made the market last year, um, the grower was promoting me like crazy, um, making sure that they knew it was me that came up with that strain, but I wasn't on the package.
Mm.
And you got to be careful too with Instagram now and advertising rules and things like that. So, I wanted to tell everybody everything, but I had to be careful of where I posted it and how it got advertised and stuff like that.
So, are you involved with the cannabis community on social media?
Yeah, that was something I kind of gravitated towards at the beginning, thinking that would help me build a community and build notoriety and get the brand out there. And it grew to be bigger than I expected. I have somewhere between 5 and 6,000 followers, something like that. And I was just up at an event this weekend at NECAN, the New England Cannabis Convention, with the soil company I rep for. And it was, I was there for them, but it was pretty funny how many people came by to see me, and knew me because of my social media. And I've never been, worried about showing my face about it. I do things legally, and it's legal, and I'm out there with it. So, people know who I am, and it's only helped me, it's,
Mm-hmm. How was NECAN?
it was, it was great. It was my first time being um, behind the booth there. I've been to several of them and been an attendee, and you go around with the grab bag and you fill it up and you get to do what you want to do. Well, it's a little different when you're at a booth, and there were so many people there that I knew that I wanted to talk to. I didn't even get to see them. It was that busy, and it was 10 to 3, 2 days in a row. And it literally felt like 2 hours each day. It went by that fast. Um, but it was a great experience. Our community in Vermont is tight. There's a lot of good people, and there's a lot of mutual respect between those people. There's not a lot of this.
Mm.
There's some of it, but there's not a lot of it. Kevin Jodrey spoke this weekend. He's a keynote speaker, and I don't know if you know who he is, but one of the legends in the cannabis community. And I guess his speech was amazing. I didn't get to see it, but a lot of my friends got to see it, and a lot of people left very energized because of it. And sometimes the community needs a little pick me up at times. And it's good to see the interaction, and then to hang out with these people kind of like socially too, like go to an after hours party with all these people, and be a part of that was really neat.
What are your thoughts on federal legalization? Would you rather it stay state to state, or,
Yeah, So I didn't get to hear the speech given by Kevin Jodry, but somebody told me one of the lines that he said, and it was about federal legalization, and it's about as scary as it gets. He goes, when it becomes federally legal and Kirkwood is involved, or is it Kirkland?
Yeah.
You know, Kirkland, sorry. We're all done. So enjoy this while you can. Straight face. Like it's coming to an end. Like that's not very inspiring. Especially, coming from a guy like that he's probably right. You know, and then I don't know where that will go. I mean, the states have set up this network. There's all these dispensaries, there's all these farms. What happens to all these people if all of a sudden cannabis is now on a different schedule and it's like um, getting a prescription drug?
Mm.
And then what happens to me that grows that prescription drug?
Yeah.
Or what happens to the breeder who has a certain strain that the federal government figures out does something medicinally? And then, that scares me too, because, I know the power of this plant. They do too,
Mm.
and, if all of a sudden this guy's got this one strain that everybody falls asleep on, well, he's got, then I'll use a strain that's in the market, Seroquel, which is also a prescription drug for sleep. I mean, that stuff scares me. I don't know if you're watching that show, Common Side Effects.
I haven't. No.
If anybody isn't watching that show, watch that show. It's about mushrooms, but all about that and how this guy finds this mushroom in the jungle, this blue mushroom, and if you're sick and you eat it, you're not sick anymore.
Oh wow.
And it's about the government and big pharma finding this out, and he becomes friends with this girl who works for big pharma. Well, he doesn't know it. Meanwhile, she's trying to get the mushroom to save the world, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he's trying to keep it to save the world. And I'll tell you, even though it's animated, it's Mike Judge is from Beavis and Butthead.
Yeah.
It's the guy that created the show, and I'll tell you, every time I watch the show, it's got my wheels turning about just that whole concept of the plant being taken over. And
No, I mean, it sounds like it's definitely right up my alley. We'll have to make sure to add that to the playlist.
It's on Max, but it's also Adult Swim, so you can get it a couple ways, I think.
Well, Kyle, I really appreciate you taking the time today and giving us a unique perspective from Vermont. Before we get out of here, is there anything else that you want to make sure the Cannabis Equipment News audience knows about yourself or your work with Sunny Gardens, Vermont?
Yeah, sure. I mean, if you can follow me on, Sunny Gardens VT Instagram, that would be great. Most of my stuff is there. I do have a Discord, small Discord for, it's just a small community. It's about 150 people. You can find the link to my Discord through my Instagram. And then you can get any of my information through there. Contact me directly if you want to talk about genetics. And then you can pick up my genetics at quite a few of the dispensaries here in Vermont as well. And just let me know where you live, and I'll try to let you know the closest one. And I do, I meet up with people all the time. That's one of my favorite things to do is go to farms, meet people, meet consumers, get seeds in the hands of people. However I got to do it, I'll do it. So just get a hold of me and I will be there.
Well, Kyle, I really appreciate you taking the time today, man, and I hope you get a chance to do it again soon.
Yeah, thank you, and I want to thank Eric as well for hooking this all up. Great guy. That was a fun weekend we had a couple of weekends ago, and I hope this goes well for you. So, thanks.
Oh yeah. Before we get out of here, I thought it went very well. Before we get out of here, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You can also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you can reach me at david@cannabisequipmentnews.com with email the podcast in the subject line. You can also subscribe to our daily newsletter. Make sure you get it delivered to your inbox first. For Kyle Sheridan, CEO, owner of Sunny Gardens, Vermont, I'm David Manti. This is the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast, and we will see you next week.
Welcome to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast.